I'm Zim, and you're listening to the Helpful Photographer Podcast in collaboration with New York City Photo Safari. To register for a safari, please visit newyorkcityphotosafari.com. When should you start shooting RAW? Well, the quick answer is now. Maybe. There are a lot of people out there who say it's RAW or nothing, but I can't totally agree with this notion. But before I get into that, let's review what a RAW file is. A RAW file is essentially the raw, uncompressed data coming out of your camera. It's all the data your camera created when you press the button. As a result, RAW files are really, really big. But since it's raw data, it can't be viewed unless you have special software that'll decipher the information. It used to be that you had to use something like Photoshop in order to be able to view those files. These days, even simple software like Apple's Finder or Microsoft's Explorer are capable of deciphering raw images. But website browsers, they still can't. Since RAW files contain so much data, it's more easily manipulated and it also has a lot more resolution. As a result, it gives you a lot more elbow room to play with. In other words, if you made some serious mistakes when you shot that image, like with exposure or you set your white balance inappropriately, you'll have a much greater likelihood of actually fixing the problem if you had shot a RAW file. You can still fix some problems when it comes to a JPEG, but you just won't have nearly as much latitude as you do with a RAW file. It should be noted that when you're reviewing your RAW images on your camera, like on the back of your LCD, you're actually looking at a JPEG. As a result of all the data that's available and the high-resolution nature of a RAW file, a lot of photographers think that it's far superior to a JPEG, which is a lot smaller and it's a compressed file format. So is a RAW file really superior? Well, if you need the data, then yes, it is. But if you don't need the data, then not at all. For instance, if you're like me and you occasionally sell stuff on eBay, it's simply not necessary to shoot those images in RAW. If I shot a small JPEG, I would be able to post it directly onto eBay right out of camera without having to convert it from a RAW file. This, of course, assumes that I expose and frame the image properly. So whether or not you really need to be shooting a RAW file depends on the conditions you like to shoot in and also what you plan on doing with the image after. So what conditions would demand that you shoot in RAW? The one that comes to mind is high contrast. Situations where there's a high variance between the dark areas and the light areas of your image. For instance, if you're shooting a landscape in the middle of the day where you have a sky filled with really bright clouds and the landscape is filled with really dark trees, by shooting a RAW file, you'll have much more success in recovering the textures in both the sky and the trees. However, you should know that your ability to recover that information is not infinite. There are certainly limits as to how much you can recover in both the dark and the light areas. So if you find yourself in situations where you have lots of contrast, it would definitely be best to shoot in RAW. So how does what you plan to do with the image factor into the RAW discussion? If you plan on printing the image particularly large, like poster size, the resolution of a RAW file would prove rather helpful to ensure that the print looks great. Lots of resolution is also helpful for those who have to do a lot of cropping, like bird photographers. Bird photographers often can't get close enough to their subject, and as a result, they have to do a lot of cropping, which means they need as much resolution as they can get out of their cameras. But as I said above, if you're just posting stuff on eBay, there's probably little to no reason to be shooting in RAW. Now, if you need to publish your images fairly quickly to a website or to social media, but you also need the images for high-quality prints later, you'll probably want to shoot both RAW and JPEG images at the same time. If your camera is capable of shooting RAW, there will be a menu item that will allow the camera to create a RAW and a JPEG file simultaneously every time you press the shutter button. The JPEG will allow you to post immediately, and the RAW file will be there just in case you need it for something more important down the line. Lastly, what shouldn't stop you from shooting RAW is the file size. Although the file size is rather large and getting larger every day, storage is also getting cheaper as well. An external hard drive literally fits in the palm of your hand and can store over 100,000 frames for the cost of about $50. So if you think you might need all that data a RAW file can give you, then absolutely start shooting RAW right away. I hope that was helpful. Until next time, keep on shooting.